Okay, I'm back. Let's see what happens with Dexter and Judy. It began like that and continued with varying shades of intensity on such a note right up to the denouncement. Dexter surrendered a part of himself to the most direct and unprincipled personality with which he had ever come in contact. Whatever Judy wanted, she went after with the full pressure of her charm. There was no divergence of method, no jockeying for position or premeditation of effects. There was a very little mental side to any of her affairs. She simply made men conscious to the highest degree of her physical loveliness. Dexter had no desire to change her. Her deficiencies were knit up with a passionate energy that transcended and justified them. As Judy's head lay against his shoulder that first night, she whispered, "I don't know what's the matter with me. Last night I thought I was in love with a man, and tonight I think I'm in love with you." It seemed to him a beautiful and romantic thing to say. It was the exquisite excitability that for the moment he controlled and owned. But a week later, she was compelled to view the same quality in a different light. She took him in her roadster to a picnic supper, and then after supper she disappeared likewise in her roadster with another man. Dexter became enormously upset and was scarcely able to be decently civil to the other people present. When she assured him that she had not kissed the other man, he knew that she was lying, yet he was glad that she had taken the trouble to lie to him. He was, as he found before the summer ended, one of a varying dozen who circulated about her. Each of them had at one time been favored above all the others. About half of them still basked in the solace of occasional sentimental revivals. Whenever one showed signs of dropping out through long neglect, she granted him a brief honeying hour, which encouraged him to tag along for a year or so longer. Judy made these forays upon the helpless and defeated without malice. Indeed, half unconscious that there was anything mischievous in what she did. When the new man came to town, everyone dropped out. Dates were automatically canceled. The helpless part of trying to do anything about it was that she did it all herself. She was not a girl who could be won in the kinetic sense. She was proof against cleverness. She was proof against charm. If any of these assailed her too strongly, she would immediately resolve the affair to a physical basis, and under the magic of her physical splendor, the strong as well as the brilliant played her game and not their own. She was entertained only by the gratification of her desires and by the direct exercise of her own charm. Perhaps from so much youthful love, so many youthful lovers, she had come in self-defense to nourish wholly from within. Succeeding Dexter's first exhilaration came restlessness and dissatisfaction. This helpless ecstasy of losing himself in her was opiate rather than tonic. It was fortunate for his work during the winter that these moments of ecstasy came infrequently. Early in their acquaintance, it had seemed for a while that there was a deep and spontaneous mutual attraction. That first August, for example, 3 days of long evenings on her dusky veranda, of strange, wan kisses through the late afternoon, in shadowy alcoves or behind the protecting trellises of the garden arbors, of mornings when she was fresh as the dream and almost shy at meeting him in the clarity of the rising day. There was all the ecstasy of an engagement about it, sharpened by the realization that there was no engagement. It was during these 3 days that for the first time he had asked her to marry him. She said, "Maybe someday." She said, "Kiss me." She said, "I'd like to marry you." She said, "I love you." She said nothing. The 3 days were interrupted by the arrival of a New York man who visited at her house for half September. To Dexter's agony, rumor engaged them. The man was the son of the president of a great trust company. But at the end of a month, it was reported that Judy was yawning. At a dance one night, she sat all evening in a motorboat with a local boy, while the New Yorkers searched the club for her frantically. She told the local boy that she was bored with her visitor, and 2 days later he left. She was seen with him at the station, and it was reported that he looked very mournful indeed. So on this note, the summer ended. Dexter was 24, and he found himself increasingly in a position to do as he wished. He joined 2 clubs in the city and lived at one of them. Though he was by no means an integral part of the stag lines at these clubs, he managed to be on hand at dances where Judy Jones was likely to appear. He could have gone out socially as much as he liked. He was an eligible young man now and popular with the downtown fathers. He confessed devotion to Judy Jones. His confessed devotion to Judy Jones had rather solidified his position, but he had no social aspirations and rather despised the dancing men who were always on tap for the younger married set. I said that wrong, but he had no social aspirations and rather despised the dancing men who were always on tap for the Thursday or Saturday parties and who filled in at the dinners with the younger married set. Already he was playing with the idea of going east to New York. He wanted to take Judy Jones with him. No disillusion as to the world in which she had grown up could cure his illusion as to her desirability. Remember that, because only in the light of it can what he did for her be understood. 18 months after he first met Judy Jones, he became engaged to another girl. Her name was Irene Shearer, and her father was one of the men who had always believed in Dexter. Irene was light-haired and sweet and honorable and a little stout, and she had 2 suitors whom she pleasantly relinquished when Dexter formally asked her to marry him. Summer, fall, winter, spring, another summer, another fall. So much he had given of his active life to the incorrigible lips of Judy Jones. She had treated him with interest, with encouragement, with malice, with indifference, with contempt. She had inflicted on him the innumerable little slights and the indignities possible in such a case, as if in revenge for having ever cared for him at all. She had beckoned him and yawned at him and beckoned him again, and he had responded often with bitterness and narrowed eyes. She had brought him ecstatic happiness and intolerable agony of spirit. She had caused him untold inconvenience and not a little trouble. She had insulted him, she had ridden over him, and she had played his interest in her against his interest in his work for fun. She had done everything to him except to criticize him. This she had not done. It seemed to him only because it might have sullied the utter indifference that she manifested and sincerely felt toward him. When autumn had come and gone again, it occurred to him that he could not have Judy Jones. He had to beat this into his mind, but he convinced himself at last. He lay awake at night for a while and argued it over. He told himself the trouble and the pain that she had caused him. He enumerated her glaring deficiencies as a wife. And then he said to himself that he loved her, and after a while he fell asleep. For a week, lest he imagined her husky voice over the telephone or her eyes opposite him at lunch, he worked hard and late, and at night he went to his office and plotted out his years. At the end of a week, he went to a dance and cut in on her at once. For almost the first time since they had met, he did not ask her to sit out with him or tell her that she was lovely. It hurt him that she did not miss these things. That was all. He was not jealous when he saw that there was a new man tonight. He had been hardened against jealousy long before. He stayed late at the dance. He sat for an hour with Irene Shearer and talked about books and about music. He knew very little about either, but he was beginning to be the master of his own time now, and he had a rather priggish notion that he, the young and already fabulously successful Dexter Green, should know more about such things. That was in October, when he was 25. In January, Dexter and Irene became engaged. It was to be announced in June, and they were to be married 3 months later. The Minnesota winter prolonged itself interminably, and it was almost May when the winds came soft and the snow ran down into Black Bear Lake at last. For the first time in over a year, Dexter was enjoying a certain tranquility of spirit. Judy Jones had been in Florida, and afterward in Hot Springs, and somewhere she had been engaged, and somewhere she had broken it off. At first, when Dexter had definitely given her up, it had made him sad that people still linked them together and asked for news of her. But when he began to be placed at dinner next to Irene Shearer, people didn't ask him about her anymore. They told him about her. He ceased to be an authority on her. May at last. Dexter walked the streets at night when the darkness was damp as rain, wondering that so soon, with so little done, so much of ecstasy had gone from him. May 1 year back had been marked by Judy's poignant, unforgivable, yet forgiven turbulence. It had been one of those rare times when he fancied she had grown to care for him. That old penny's worth of happiness he had spent for this little bushel of content. He knew that Irene would be no more than a curtain spread behind him, a hand moving among gleaming teacups, a voice calling to children. Fire and loveliness were gone. The magic of nights and the wonder of the varying hours and seasons, slender lips, down-turning, dropping to his lips and bearing him up into the heaven of eyes. The thing was deep in him. He was too strong and alive for it to lie lightly, for it to die lightly. In the middle of May, when the weather balanced for a few days on the thin bridge that led to deep summer, he turned in one night at Irene's house. Their engagement was to be announced in a week now. No one would be surprised at it. And tonight they would sit together on the lounge at the University Club and look on for an hour at the dancers. It gave him a sense of solidity to go with her. She was so sturdily popular, so intensely great. He mounted the steps of the brownstone house and stepped inside. Irene, he called. Mrs. Shear came to the living room to meet him. Dexter, she said. Irene's gone upstairs with a splitting headache. She wanted to go with you, but I made her go to bed. Nothing serious, Oh, no. She's going to play golf with y'all in the morning. You can spare her just for one night, can't you, Dexter? Her smile was kind. She and Dexter liked each other. In the living room, he talked for a moment before he said goodnight. Returning to the University Club where he had rooms, he stood in the doorway for a moment and watched the dancers. He leaned against the doorpost, nodding at a man or two, yawned. Hello, darling. The familiar voice at his elbow startled him. Judy Jones had left a man and crossed the room to him. Judy Jones, the slender, enameled doll in cloth of gold. Gold at the band of her head, gold in two slipper points at her dresses hem. The fragile glow of her face seemed to blossom as she smiled at him. A breeze of warmth and light blew through the room. His hands in the pockets of his dinner jacket tightened spasmodically. He was filled with a sudden excitement. When did you get back? He asked casually. Come here and I'll tell you about it. She turned and he followed her. She had been away. He could have wept at the wonder of her return. She had passed through enchanted streets, doing things that were like provocative music. All mysterious happenings, all fresh and quickening hopes had gone away with her, come back with her now. She turned in the doorway. Have you a car here? If you haven't, I have. I have a coupe. And then, with a rustle of golden cloth, he slammed the door. Into so many cars she had stepped, like this, like that, her back against the leather, so her elbow resting on the door, waiting. She would have been soiled long since had there been anything to soil her, except herself, but this was her own self outpouring. With an effort, he forced himself to start the car and back into the street. This was nothing, he must remember. She had done this before, and he had put her behind him, as he would have crossed a bad account from his books. He drove slowly downtown and, affecting abstraction, traversed the deserted streets of the business section, peopled here and there when a movie was giving out, or a crowd where consumptive or pugilistic youth lounged in front of pool halls. The clink of glasses and the slap of hands on the bars issued from saloons, cloisters of glazed glass and dirty yellow light. She was watching him closely, and the silence was embarrassing. Yet in the crisis, he could find no casual word with which to profane the hour. At a convenient turning, he began to zigzag back towards the University Club. Have you missed me? She said suddenly. Everybody misses you. He wondered if she knew of Irene Shearer. She had been back only a day. Her absence had been almost contemporaneous with his engagement. What a remark, Judy laughed sadly, without sadness. She looked at him searchingly. He became absorbed in the dashboard. You're handsomer than you used to be, she said thoughtfully. Dexter, you have the most memorable eyes. He could have laughed at this, but he did not laugh. It was the sort of thing that was said to sophomores, yet it stabbed at him. I'm awfully tired of everything, darling, she called everyone darling, endowing the endearment with careless individual camaraderie. I wish you'd marry me. The directness of this confused him. He should have told her now that he was going to marry another girl, but he could not tell her. He could have easily has sworn that he had never loved her. I think we'd get along, she continued on the same note, unless probably you've forgotten me and fallen in love with another girl. Her confidence was obviously enormous. She had said, in effect, that she found such a thing impossible to believe, that if it were true, he had merely committed a childish indiscretion, and probably just to show off. She would forgive him, because it was not a matter of any moment, but rather something to be brushed aside lightly. Of course you could never love anybody but me, she continued. I like the way you love me. Oh, Dexter, have you forgotten last year? No, I haven't forgotten. Neither have I. Was she sincerely moved, or was she carried along by the wave of her own acting? I wish that we could be like that again, she said, and he forced himself to answer, I don't think we can. I suppose not. I hear you're giving Irene Shear a violent rush. There was not the faintest emphasis on the name, yet Dexter was suddenly ashamed. Oh, take me home, cried Judy suddenly. I don't want to go back to that idiotic dance with those children. Then, as he turned up the street that led to the residence district, Judy began to cry quietly to herself. He had never seen her cry before. The dark street lightened, the dwellings of the rich loomed up around them, and he stopped his coupe in front of the great white bulk of the Mortimer Joneses' house. Somnolent, gorgeous, drenched with the splendor of the damp moonlight. Its solidity startled him. The strong walls, the steel of the girders, the breadth and beam and pomp of it were only to bring out the contrast with the young beauty beside him. It was sturdy to accentuate her slightness, as if to show what a breeze could be generated by a butterfly's wing. He sat perfectly quiet, his nerves in wild clamor, afraid that if he moved, he would find her irresistibly in his arms. 2 tears had rolled down her wet face and trembled on her upper lip. I'm more beautiful than anybody else, she said brokenly. Why can't I be happy? Her moist eyes tore at his stability. Her mouth turned slowly downward with that exquisite sadness. I'd like to marry you if you'll have me, Dexter. I suppose you'll think I'm not worth having, but I'll be so beautiful for you, Dexter. A million phrases of anger, pride, passion, hatred, tenderness fought on his lips. Then a perfect wave of emotion washed over him, carrying off with it a sediment of wisdom, of convention, of doubt, of honor. This was his girl who was speaking, his own, his beautiful, his pride. Won't you come in? He heard her draw in her breath sharply. Waiting. All right. His voice was trembling. I'll come in. It was strange that neither when it was over nor a long time afterward did he regret that night. Looking at it from the perspective of 10 years, the fact that Judy's flair for him endured just 1 month seemed of little importance. Nor did it matter that by his yielding, he subjected himself to a deeper agony in the end and gave serious hurt to Irene Shearer and to Irene's parents, who had befriended him. There was nothing sufficiently pictorial about Irene's grief to stamp itself on his mind. Dexter was, at bottom, hard-minded. The attitude of the city on his action was of no importance to him, not because he was going to leave the city, but because any outside attitude on the situation seemed superficial. He was completely indifferent to popular opinion. Nor, when he had seen that it was no use, that he did not possess in himself the power to move fundamentally or to hold Judy Jones, did he bear any malice toward her. He loved her, and he would love her until the day he was too old for loving, but he could not have her. So he tasted the deep pain that is reserved only for the strong, just as he had tasted for a little while the deep happiness. Even the ultimate falsity of the grounds upon which Judy terminated the engagement, that she did not want to take him away from Irene. Judy, who had wanted nothing else, did not revolt him. He was beyond any revulsion or any amusement. He went east in February with the intention of selling out his laundries and settling in New York, but the war came to America in March and changed his plans. He returned to the West, handed over the management of the business to his partner, and went into the first officers' training camp in late April. He was one of those young thousands who greeted the war with a certain amount of relief, welcoming the liberation of webs of tangled emotion. This story's not his biography. Remember, although things creep into it which have nothing to do with those dreams that he had when he was young, we are almost done with them and with him now. There's only one more incident to be related here, and it happens 7 years further on. It took place in New York, where he had done well, so well that there were no barriers too high for him. He was 32 years old now, and except for one flying trip immediately after the war, he had not been west in 7 years. A man named Devlin from Detroit came in his office to see him in a business way, and then and there this incident occurred and closed out, so to speak, this particular side of his life. So, you're from the Middle West, said the man Devlin with careless curiosity. That's funny. I thought men like you were probably born and raised on Wall Street. You know, a wife of one of my best friends in Detroit came from your city. I was an usher at their wedding. Dexter waited with no apprehension of what was to come. Judy Sims, said Devlin with no particular interest. Judy Jones, she once was. Yes, I knew her. A dull impatience spread over him. He had heard, of course, that she was married. Perhaps deliberately he had heard no more. Awfully nice girl, brooded Devlin meaninglessly. I'm sort of sorry for her. Why? Something in Dexter was alert, receptive at once. Oh, Lud Sims, he has gone to pieces in a way. I don't mean he ill uses her, but he drinks and he runs around. Doesn't she run around? Oh no, she stays home with her kids. Oh, she's a little too old for him, said Devlin. Too old, cried Dexter. Why, man, she's only 27. He was possessed with the wild notion of rushing out into the streets and taking a train to Detroit. He rose to his feet spasmodically. Oh, I guess you're busy, Devlin apologized quickly. I didn't realize. No, I'm not busy, said Dexter, steadying his voice. I'm not busy at all. Not busy at all. Did you say she was 27? No, I said she was 27. Yes, you did, agreed Devlin dryly. Well, go on then. Come on, go on. What do you mean? About Judy Jones. Devlin looked at him helplessly. Well, I told you all that there is to it. He treats her like the devil. Oh, they're not going to get divorced or anything. I mean, when he's particularly outrageous, she just forgives him. In fact, I'm inclined to think she loves him. She was a pretty girl when she first came to Detroit. A pretty girl. The phrase struck Dexter as ludicrous. Isn't she a pretty girl anymore? Oh, she's all right. Look here, said Dexter, sitting down suddenly. I don't understand. You say she was a pretty girl, and now you say she's all right? I don't understand what you mean. Judy Jones wasn't a pretty girl at all. She was a great beauty. Why, I knew her. She was... Devlin laughed pleasantly. I'm not trying to start a row, he said. I think Judy's a nice girl, and I like her. I can't understand how a man like Lud Sims could fall madly in love with her, but he did. And then he added, most of the women like her. Dexter looked closely at Devlin, thinking wildly that there must be a reason for this, some insensitivity in the man or some private malice. Lots of women fade just like that. Devlin snapped his fingers. You must have seen it happen. Perhaps I've forgotten how pretty she was at her wedding. I've seen her so much since then. You see, she has nice eyes. A sort of dullness settled down upon Dexter. For the first time in his life, he felt like getting very drunk. He knew that he was laughing loudly at something Devlin had said, but he did not know what it was or why it was funny. When in a few minutes Devlin went, he lay down on his lounge and he looked out the window at the New York skyline into which the sun was sinking in dull, lovely shades of pink and gold. He had thought about that having nothing else to lose, he was vulnerable at last, but he knew that he had just lost something more. As surely as if he had married Judy Jones and seen her fade away before his very eyes. The dream was gone. Something had been taken from him. In a sort of panic, he rushed the palms of his hands into his eyes and tried to bring up a picture of the waters lapping on Sherry Island and the moonlit veranda and gingham on the golf links and the dry sun and the gold color of her neck's soft down and her mouth damp to his kisses and her eyes plaintive with melancholy and her freshness like new fine linen in the morning. Why, these things were no longer in the world. They had existed and they existed no longer. For the first time in years, the tears were now streaming down his face, but they were for himself now. He did not care about mouth and eyes and moving hands. He wanted to care, and he could not care, for he had gone away, and he could never go back anymore. The gates were closed. The sun was gone down, and there was no beauty but the gray beauty of steel that withstands all time. Even the grief that he could have borne was left behind in the country of illusion, of youth, of the richness of life where his winter dreams had flourished. Long ago, he said, long ago, there was something in me, but now that thing is gone. Now that thing is gone. That thing is gone. I cannot cry. I cannot care. That thing will come back no more. So, maybe you see why I had you write about the American dream. Of course, it has something to do with Fitzgerald. It has something to do with the 20s. It will have something to do with Gatsby. But it certainly has something to do with this story, too. You've got your Dexter. And Dexter, he wants to be everything. He wants to not just rub elbows with the rich and famous. He wants to be rich and famous. And he gets it. But the one thing he can't get, his one intangible dream, is Judy Jones. And Judy just plays him like a fiddle. Everybody who's watching this right now knows some girl like this. She does nothing but just play. And he wants to be serious, but it's not to be. She ruins the only time that he has an opportunity to have satisfaction. But would he really been satisfied with Irene? I don't think so. Obviously, she wasn't really the girl for him. And Judy lured him away so easily. So, in the end, Judy was just a regular girl. Judy got married to a guy who treated her bad, who ran around on her. She stayed home with her kids, and all of her splendor, all of her luster, everything that was so fabulous about her faded away. And with that, for Dexter, the dream was gone. That part of him, that excitement, that vitality, that life, that lifeblood, it was gone. And he didn't care. Couldn't care about anything anymore. So it's pretty wild. It's a tragedy. It's definitely not a love story, but I love it anyway. Any questions you have, any comments, let me know. If you kind of liked this story, read it again. Read it on your own and see what you think, because the more I read it, the more I study it, the more I love it. And maybe you'll feel the same way.